Hey everybody, how's it going? LiKeBuTTeR here. Welcome back to another Division video. Today we're going to be talking about my 1.6 wish list. Yes, these are going to be the things that I'm hoping for the next Division patch, and I'm going to explain my opinions and let you guys know why I think a lot of these things need to be changed in order for the future of the game to be on a positive slope like it was in 1.4. So if you guys don't know, 1.4 completely revamped the entire game. They basically took the whole game and overhauled it. It needed it. There were stats that were like completely just spiraling out of control. There was useless gear sets. There was unbalanced PvP. There was extremely unbalanced PvE. NPCs were hitting too hard, gear was way too dependent on certain stats, and 1.4 put us in a huge step forward from 1.3, and it seemed like 1.5 was kind of a small step back from that. And I think there's a couple of reasons why that is. First of all, 1.4 was tested for about 4 weeks on the PTS. It gave people plenty of time to give their feedback, and they could also tweak a lot of things, and then we could give our feedback each week to see if it's better, if it's worse. And there was nothing for us to test except 1.4, the core of the game, the things that we've already had. And when we were testing 1.5, a lot of people, including myself, so I'm at fault for this as well, we're just playing survival because it was the new DLC, it was the new fun thing to do, and only having the PTS for 2 weeks, I think really hurt the overall quality of 1.5. There really wasn't time to get the gear and give proper feedback. I'm assuming that came with time constraints, with the fact that I think for PS4 had to come out before the end of the year. But 1.5 was a small step backwards. Now with 1.6 being strictly focused on PvP, I think this is going to be a really important update for them to nail. PvP is something that's lacked from the beginning of the game. It's always had this type of either you're, doing really well and it feels really good, and then sometimes it feels like your bullets just aren't doing anything at all. And you didn't see this as much in the beta until about around 1.1 to 1.2. 1.2 was around the time when everyone was just running in and out of triage with their first aid heals and the 75% mitigation. Everyone was pretty much invulnerable at that point. And like we didn't really know back then what the problem was, and now you see things with like the player talents and stuff that give you more resistance on top of the resistance that you already have from armor, and it makes sense why all of a sudden your bullets are doing no damage. So I want to talk about the wish list that I have for 1.6. Now let's first start off with stats on gear, okay? One of the biggest problems in the Division, and it's been there since the start of the game, is the way armor works. Armor works with mitigation, meaning the more armor you have, the less damage you're taking from all sources. As long as it's bullet damage, you're taking less damage from everything. That's NPCs, that's players, that's anything that's shooting you. Turrets, anything at all that's doing direct bullet damage to you. Now, for the first, 4 patches, there was never any counter to armor. Well, it turns out that we're starting to figure out that armor really necessarily wasn't the problem. It was the mitigation that you were getting stacking on top of the armor that made it such an issue. Now, if you go back and you play in the level 14 bracket and you pop defensive alt, you're not going to be able to sponge that many shots. It's not like you don't take damage. You still can get shot. I mean, obviously it's slower with the 50% damage reduction, but you can notice a big difference from when you pop the alt at a lower level than you do if you pop the alt when you're completely min-maxed, and that's because of the stacking of mitigation. There's reasons why people like the PvP and the beta so much, because no one really knew what they were building. Min-maxing your gear back then was nearly impossible because of how rare the drops were. So you had everyone kind of running around with these Frankenstein builds where you had damage to elites and all these useless stats, so the game actually felt balanced. It felt like you could shoot someone and put them down, and it still had that RPG feel. But now, with loot being so easy to get, and the fact that you can roll stats on gear, you can roll weapon talents, everyone that plays the game a good amount is going to have min-max gear. And if there is a strong gear set like Alpha Bridge is in this patch, people are going to easily get that build and be able to min-max that. So what you have is you have people running around with a min-max version of the best build in the game that couldn't possibly be tested in a PTS of such a short time. And I think a big problem is just the mitigation. So I hope in 1.6 that we remove armor as a major stat. I think it's time that we just got armor completely, out of the stat rolls, because if armor remains as mitigation, it will always be the best thing to roll, and that kind of kills build diversity. If you notice, ever since 1.3, in 1.4 and 1.5, there's no build diversity because of the fact that you can't hit the armor cap. It makes people build armor on everything, and it's just 100% necessary because of how powerful mitigation is. If you can get up near the 50, 55, 60%, you got to remember you're basically increasing your health pool by that much, which is, insane. You're basically, if you have 50% mitigation and you have 200,000 health, you're basically doubling your health pool, which is about 400,000. And that needs to not work that way. Because what happens is, if the game is built around mitigation to bullets, that's why you get all of those really frustrating things, like the sticky bombs when they were broken, seeker mines. Right now, seeker mines are one-shotting people. One-shot sniper builds, one-shot. There's just so many one-shot builds out there when it comes to skill power because of the fact of your health pool is kind of built off of mitigation rather than health. Now, if we had 400,000 health, no mitigation, and we had like those seeker mines hitting us and stuff, they wouldn't be one-shotting us anymore. So it's just, I feel like mitigation is one of the core problems to why the PvP feels so wrong. It just doesn't feel good. With the player talents, with critical save and on the move, you can get up to 70% damage reduction on top of like defensive all. There's so many ways that you can stack those mitigations. You got to remember the PvP multiplier is also 48% too. So you have these equations where it's just running the damage that you're doing through so many multipliers that sometimes, if somebody uses a player talent like critical save or on the move or battle buddy, it's going to make the damage that you're hitting them with almost negligible. Like, it almost seems like they're not taking damage at all because they're getting healed from medkits, they're getting healed from skills, they have teammates buffing them, they're getting damage resistance from things like booster shot, and like there's so many different ways to stack mitigation. So I really hope that armor gets removed as a major stat so that people can get build diversity back, and I really hope that armor penetration or enemy armor damage gets moved back to a major stat. I think the only reason that it didn't work as a major statistic is because armor was still so important to build. When you put enemy armor damage and you make it work in PvP, that's fine. I feel like there should always be some sort of counter to something in the game, and with armor being on every single piece of gear in the game, you would think that there would be some sort of counter to that for DPS players who wanted like sacrifice how much mitigation they're building to do more damage to other people. Maybe they have like a healer build in their group and they want to be that glass cannon of the group. It's impossible to do that when a major stat like armor has no counter. So I think that enemy armor damage was good for PvP, but the reason it doesn't work out in PvP is because everyone with the assault rifles and the alpha bridge combo and the 20% extra damage that you get from both the 3-piece alpha and also the uncomplicated on the FAMAS, you get this break in the game where it feels like the person is doing either way too much damage or not a lot of damage at all. And that comes with the resistances. You got to remember, armor's only a small part of those resistances. And when armor is the only resistance a player has, so for example, let's say that I'm standing here with 55% armor and someone is shooting me with 60% enemy armor damage. That runs through a multiplier, so it ends up being like 18% extra damage that they're doing. So 18% of that 55% that you have is getting completely removed. And the lower that the mitigation is, the less that it means. The higher mitigation goes, it scales like incredibly, because the closer you get to 100%, the stronger the mitigation is, obviously, right? Because you're getting close to taking 0 damage at all. So when armor is the only mitigation that you have, the enemy armor damage does way too much, right? Because of the fact that it's a minor stat and everyone can get 60% as long as they're using an assault rifle. There's no trade-off for the enemy armor damage anymore because it's a minor stat. So you're trading off something like 30% burn resist or 30% shock resist, 30% disorient resist, something like that. You're trading that off for enemy armor damage, whereas enemy armor damage is useful all the time. Every single time you shoot a player, every single time you shoot an NPC and they have armor, you're getting percentages from that. Whereas something like shock resistance, bleed resistance, all that stuff only has a small percentage that's affected by that. Like burn resistance, for example, is 30%. Basically what that does is it reduces your chance of being burned by only 30%. So I don't know how it works. If it's like every second, it basically rolls a percentage. And if you're in that percentage, then it will set you on fire. If you're not, then it won't. But basically, you just can't like compare something like 11% enemy armor damage to those really weak 30% shock resist or something like that. It doesn't help you out as much as the enemy armor damage does. And if you think about it, there's so many useless like stats in the game still, like damage to elites or protection from elites. Both of those need to be removed from the game, I think, because in the beginning of the game, when you played certain missions and you went into the dark zone, everything was elite. So those statistics actually meant something. I think it would be much better to have enemy armor damage as a major stat, because that could fill in for damage to elites. Because that way, the enemy armor damage is going to be strong against other enemies rather than just the elites. It'll be strong against the veterans. It'll be strong against, all the things that aren't considered an elite. Things like ferocious, like I think that's just a terrible talent. It just needs to be removed from the game. And I'm all for PvE only stats, but the problem is when you have PvE only stats, you have like these high end named items like the Barrett's chest piece. Like how depressing is it when you get damage to elites and protection from elites as your main attributes on your chest piece? That's awful, and with removing armor, there needs to be other stats that go into those major attributes. I would like to see crit hit damage going a little higher. I would like to see crit chance be put in that slot on the chest piece. I would like to see enemy armor damage put into that major attribute. That way the major attributes, I feel like all the major attributes should be useful in some way, shape, or form, especially on something like a chest piece. Now, that's not going to hurt build diversity because people are still going to want to have the specific stats that they want for their build. It's not going to change that, but it's just going to make it so that there's some pieces that aren't complete garbage. Every piece that you pick up should be useful in some way, shape, or form. And if you're using something like protection from elites or damage to elites and you're playing in the normal mode and there's no elites, well, there you go. You got stats that are completely pointless on your gear. And I think it would be cool because, enemy armor damage is going to fill in for those damage to elites. It's just going to be helpful also in PvP. And I think that's another thing that really discourages people from PvPing, because if they have, if they don't have a lot of time to play this game and they have stuff like damage to elites and protection to elites, they know that that's not going to help them in PvP, so they don't even bother PvPing in the dark zone when everyone else is running around with a completely min-max build with exotic damage resilience and armor. And it just, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense that things like that exist. And I would like to see them remove some of those things and kind of shuffle around the major and minor attributes of stuff, because I think that with enemy, if they remove armor as a major stat, that means that there's still going to be armor. You're still going to have that base armor roll on your gear. It just means that enemy armor damage is going to mean a lot less because it works off a percentage, and they can always like toy with the PvP damage, or they could always toy with that equation there to fix it to what it needs to be, which I'm sure they're gonna have to do that a little bit if they remove it as a major stat, because then they don't have to have as much percentage leaking through as they do now because of the fact that everyone has to build mitigation. So with armor gone as a major stat, I don't think you guys are going to understand how much better that's going to make PvP. You're not going to see people face tanking bullets anymore. You're not going to be seeing people like running directly at rogues. The thing is like if you're a group of rogues, you're at an extreme disadvantage, right? It's you versus the entire server, essentially, unless there's other rogues on the server. Now, you should be at an advantage for the fact that you're playing defense. The people are coming to you. Well, the thing is, there is no advantage to a rogue group anymore because there is no risk for running straight at those rogues. All you have to do is run right at a rogue. Once you take damage, you use a med kit, you pop your heal, and you're at this insane amount of resistance, and then you can just push the rogues while you're completely invulnerable. It needs to be like the beta was in like 1.4 was, where if you run directly at a group of rogues like an idiot and you have no strategy and you don't throw grenades and you don't use smokes and shocks to push them, then you should be able to get shot down instantaneously. What this is going to do is it's going to allow a lot more people to use cover. It's going to allow the game to be a lot more tactical. It's going to be, you're going to have to think things through. You're not going to be able to just face tank bullets and then run directly at your target where you want to get to. And I can't stress enough, like that's why people loved 1.1 PvP. That's why people love the beta. People actually died when you shot them, and that's what it needs to be. And it needs to be less dependent on signature abilities. Right now, it's 100% necessary for the most part to pop Tactical Link in order to put somebody down when they have so much resistance. And I think that signature abilities are good. They should help the team, but they definitely shouldn't be necessary for you to take out a certain group. Now, it probably sounds like I'm kind of contradicting myself. First, I'm saying that people are dying too fast, then I'm saying people are dying too slow. And here's where the problem comes, okay? I'm going to try to explain this the best as I possibly can. Okay, so think about it in different sections of resistances. You have these resistances in PvP. Let's talk about the 48%, first of all, which is a percentage that all your damage runs through when you're shooting another player, because obviously the rolls on stats and the amount of damage you do is just a little bit too much. So they make it so that when you're scaling through the lower levels and whatnot, to avoid that giant gap of having to leap, 40,000 health every level, they basically run the PvP through a multiplier, so that basically removes a part of the damage that you're doing to someone. Then you have armor mitigation, which you're mitigating a percentage of what you're taking. So you're now taking 60% of that 48% that you're doing. So you're shooting a player that has 60% mitigation. They're only taking 60% of that 45. I don't know why I keep wanting to say 45. Of that 48%. Okay, so in that situation, if you have enemy armor damage, you're going to be able to shred that person, right? Because there's only a little bit of mitigation because of the fact that you're cutting out a percentage of their armor mitigation. But if you add things in like critical save and on the move and battle buddy, all these things that boost your resistances for a certain amount of time, your enemy armor damage isn't cutting through that resistance. Do you guys see what I'm saying? Like, your enemy armor damage isn't cutting through that. It's only cutting through their armor mitigation. So even though you're doing a lot of damage to their armor mitigation, those other mitigations from player talents are making their resistances out of control. And that's why sometimes, and I've seen it so many times before, you could be running the best build in the game where you're running Alpha Bridge and you're running, like the best talents that you can get, and then you're running Uncomplicated, and you do a bunch of damage to someone, you completely melt them, right? And they get really low and they pop a med kit and they pop a heal, and all of a sudden, the second half of your magazine, you notice that you're not taking damage at all. Now, it's not that you're missing, it's that your damage has been incredibly decreased because of things like critical save, battle buddy, that kind of thing. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So the problem is people are either dying too fast or they're not dying at all. There's no consistency because of the stacking resistances. So I want to see armor get removed as a major stat. I want to see things like critical save, on the move, Battle Buddy. I want all those things to be reduced, at least in PvP. I know it's not a big deal in PvE because you're taking damage from so many different targets. If you don't know how to mitigation or resistance works, you're reducing the percentage that you're taking from a single target. So if you have like 6, 7, or 8 NPCs shooting you, you're still going to notice that you're taking a lot of damage because you're reducing that percentage on each individual bullets that are coming in. Now, if there's a lot of bullets coming in from different sources, then you're going to see that damage, and that's why in the Dark Zone it's so incredibly hard as a solo player to beat a group unless they're completely just not aware of things like critical save and when to pop their heals at like a certain time and that kind of thing, and how to buff their teammates. But when you have like a lot of sources shooting one player, those resistances mean less. So actually, a lot of people were like, well, if they remove those resistances, it'll be even harder for solo players. That's actually not true. It's the complete opposite, because you got to think about it like this. As a solo player, say you're fighting a group of 3, you're only focusing one person, which means that your damage that you're doing to that one person in that group is going to be mitigated by a certain percentage. So they pop a medkit, all of a sudden that target is completely unkillable. Meanwhile, you have 3 people shooting you, and that your mitigation is only working per person who's shooting you. So even if you have, say, 70% damage resistance, there's still 30% leaking in from each person shooting you. Do you guys see what I'm saying? Like, it's very hard to explain, but I think I explained it pretty well. The thing is that there needs to be a time to kill where if a solo player catches a player in a group out, like, they split from their group a little bit and they kind of run off, that solo player should be able to take that player out if they misplay. If they misplay like that. Right now, it's not like that, because all that player in that group has to do is pop a medkit, and then they're invulnerable, and they run back to their group, and then you got the other group like coming in, and your magazines almost ran out because you were shooting that other guy. And like I said, that's why I think the lower the mitigation, the better the game's going to be. Now, obviously, you still need those RPG like elements, which is going to need to get tested before 1.6 comes out. But I think with lower mitigation, it's going to bring the tactical shooter back into this game. You're not going to see the 3-meter, circle strafing anymore. People from cover are going to have more of an advantage. And I think you're going to see, rogues being more successful in their rogue runs if players go in, kind of uncoordinated. Like right now, how it stands is when you're a rogue group, you can take out like groups, but as soon as the whole server comes, unless you can make half the group go rogue, which happens sometimes, it's just really difficult with things like shock turrets and seeker mines and all that stuff. But I'm hoping that with lower mitigation, it'll make the PvP a lot more strategical and a lot better experience for everyone. Now, I don't think you should have to have completely min-max gear in order to be able to do well in the Dark Zone. Like, obviously, if you have min-max gear, it should help you out to do better. It shouldn't just be a complete crutch like it is right now. So I'm hoping for those major stats to get changed. Mitigation is a big thing that needs to get removed. Nerf the player talents. And I think we're going to have a lot better experience in the Dark Zone. Now that we talked about that, let's talk about like PvE, since we've talked mostly about like PvP stuff. Now, as far as the PvE end, I don't think there's going to be too much content, but you did hear that Hamish said on State of the Game that there is going to be some PvE stuff for 1.6. I would really like to see some more hardcore endgame content. They talked about that quite a lot in the past, knowing that for the hardcore players that play the game a lot, there's really not that challenge factor like there was in 1.2 and 1.3. I don't think that challenge factor should be 100% necessary to progress in the game, but I do think that those, the higher level of activities and the higher end game should be something that people can do and have it actually be difficult, even if you're completely min-max. So I'm hoping to see maybe like heroic come back, or some sort of game mode that's harder than challenging with certain rewards, maybe cosmetics or something. Obviously, I highly doubt with 1.6 being dedicated towards PvP. I really doubt that we're going to receive raids, but I would love to see raids in the future. If every DLC came out with one raid, I think that this game would have some of the best like end game content ever, because we saw that raids already work in this game. If you look at General Assembly works just like a raid does. Now they would have to add some sort of mechanics in there, but it would be so cool if it was like, if the mechanics were so like hard that it took days for groups to figure out how to beat the mission. That's what I want. And you kind of saw small mechanics in things like Dragon's Nest, where that one part was almost impossible because people kept respawning constantly, where you have to kill them all at the same time. Like, that's cool. I like mechanics like that, but I think it needs to be more in-depth, and I hope if we do get year 2 content that will be something that they work on, because I think this game would have fantastic raids. But just some sort of PvE content to give the PvE players something to do other than just run around and just mow through challenging. Like, it's easy and it should be easy, but with how much easier it is to get gear, they need more challenging end games. So that's what I would like to see for PvE. And let's talk a little bit about Last Stand. Now, I know that they showed like a video in the beginning of the year what their year 1 plans were. But if you notice, like, survival was nothing what they showed in that trailer. They showed survival as being something in the Dark Zone specifically, and it turned into being this open world kind of battle royale, feeling, or this battle royale game mode that's been worked on probably for an extremely long time, because, they had 1.4, or they had the content pushed back so that they could release 1.4 to fix the core balancing of the game. And Last Stand they showed in the year 1 content trailer as being like a horde mode, where you kind of set up defenses against NPCs. I don't think, however, that's going to be what it is. I really, really don't think that that's what it's going to be. I think sometimes, in the gaming industry, ideas change and plans change over time. And I really think that Last Stand is going to be something PvP oriented. I really hope that it's an arena, some sort of PvP experience where we can go in and get a solid fight and fight other people that want to PvP. The thing that sucks about the Dark Zone is like 90% of the time you're fighting people who don't want to PvP. You're fighting people who are going around and they're farming and doing PvE. And it feels like you're forcing that player to do something that they don't want. I want to have a queue like there is with survival, and I want us to actually be able to go in with a group. I really hope we get like stripped from our gear and just have like a straight up PvP fight or PvP queue where we can fight other players who actually want to PvP. And I think that would be really cool for the game. I think it would be a dope experience. I know everyone that PvPs in this game has wanted an arena for such a long time, so maybe like Central Park or something. That reminds me, another thing, I really hope they extend the map a little bit. Maybe give us some more Dark Zone areas. Give us something. Another thing that I doubt will happen in 1.6, but I want to see in the future, is more events in the Dark Zone, kind of like the supply drops, how they happen every 45 minutes. I would love to see like a high value target where there's this one NPC on the map with, whether it's like a hunter or somebody with hunter AI, just really difficult mission for the whole server to do. So you can either choose to either do it together and split the loot, or you can choose to kill the other groups off and have this massive fight. And I think it would be cool. I think supply drops kind of provokes PvP. I think a lot more things need to provoke PvP in the future if it's going to work out. Anyways, guys, I'm going to let you go. I know I've been blabbing for a lot, but that was basically my 1.6 wish list. I really hope that PvP becomes more balanced, and I hope PvE has more of endgame for hardcore players. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop the video a like. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care, everybody.